Hi guys, and welcome to my ranking of the VHS franchise. There are 7 movies in this series now, and I would argue that this is one of the biggest success stories from within the found footage genre. This has become a bit of a staple of Shudder's October release season, and I think they've already announced that there's going to be an 8th film next October, so this ranking, it's only going to stay up to date for about 12 months, but c'est la vie. Now, I've decided today not to include the spin-off movies. There are 2 spin-off films associated with VHS, but I'm not even sure one of them's a horror film. The one I've seen is a horror film, but it's not very good. It's called Siren, and it absolutely would have come bottom today if I had included it. So I do apologise to any fans of Siren or Kids vs. Aliens, I think the other one is called. I'm not going to include those. I'm just going to keep it to the anthology movies. And the only other thing I wanted to say before we dive into it is that I had a really hard time ranking these. I mean, there's only 7 of them, but they're all kind of similar in quality, really. I mean, I had to go on Wiki and look into each individual film, remind myself of which stories are in which one, and yeah, I was chopping and changing my order and I couldn't make my mind up. I think everybody will have a completely different list when it comes to this franchise. Obviously, rankings like these are always subjective, but this isn't like the Aliens franchise, for example, where you're always going to get Alien and Aliens at the top. I think people will have wildly different lists when it comes to VHS, but it's time to delve into mine. So let's start with the film that I consider to be the worst in the VHS franchise, but quick disclaimer, it's still perfectly good and watchable as it happens. So first up we have VHS 85. Just to be clear, this is the 6th of the 7 films. It came out in 2023, so it's the most recent but one. It's got a great wraparound tale, one of the best in the series actually. So there's this team of scientists who have got this kid alien locked up, and every time we go back to this segment, the alien has evolved into something a little bit more freaky looking. And come the final reel, it escapes from the room and then all hell breaks loose. I won't spoil how it ends. In terms of the main stories, there's only one that I think is especially noteworthy and, as it happens, brilliant. So there's this woman who's giving this sermon in a small room, and she's using some kind of virtual reality device to tap into a world that looks like it's just been lifted from the film Tron, but there's a demon in there and things go pear-shaped. But the story's got a great atmosphere. I really like that one. Beyond that one, though, the rest of them are kind of average. There's an attempt to do a 2-part story here, which works really well, except when I rewatched this quite recently, I had a huge yearning for these 2 parts to be lumped together rather than having a gap in the middle, but nothing you can do about that now. In terms of bad stories, there's not any that would fit into that category necessarily, but the final story in the film, which is some kind of police procedural thing, that one struggled to maintain my interest for some reason. But on the whole, still a perfectly fine VHS film. Don't be tempted to skip it or anything if you haven't seen it. It's still pretty decent. Number 6, we have VHS Beyond. So this is the most recent one that came out. Again, great wraparound story involving a UFO abductee who goes missing from this house. And supposedly there are 2 videotapes that might shine a light on what happened to him. And I think we finally see them in the last bit of this segment at the end of the film. When it comes to the main stories, I love the first one. It's like a Resident Evil homage. We've got all these cops breaking into this building and there are zombies there and bosses with chainsaws. It's great. The final story in the film is great also. So there's this female UFO nut who's in the desert looking for flying saucers. She finally finds one and gets on one. And what follows is some really tense stuff, some great body horror, some really original ideas. The trouble with this film is those 2 stories I've just mentioned are the 1st and the 5th tales, and then in the middle we've got these stories that I had certain issues with. I guess the one that's square in the middle, the 3rd story, is mostly fine. It's about UFOs and parachute jumpers. But the 2nd story that's set in India just feels like a retread of stories that we've had in previous installments of VHS, and the 4th story features this woman who just reminds me of Kathy Bates from Misery. She's trying to turn people into dogs, and that one just didn't land for me at all. But overall, still had a perfectly good time with this. I'd say it's just slightly better than VHS 85. Number 5, we have VHS 2. So this is probably the worst of the really early VHS films. It's got a pretty atrocious wraparound story. There's a nice boob shot right at the beginning. I haven't forgotten that. I mean, when it comes to me ranking films in a certain order, everything's on the table to be judged, you know. Even the littlest things can potentially raise or lower a film in the pecking order. But the trouble with this wraparound story is that once we get to the couple, the main man and wife or whoever they are, everything's just incomprehensible after that. I've no idea why they're going into this particular building to just watch VHS tapes in the dark. It all seems very random. It does absolutely nothing for me. And to be honest, I got very frustrated whenever we had to go back to this in between the main stories. And even the main stories themselves take a while to get going here. Like the first one involving the guy who's got a camera in his eye, it's kind of weak. It doesn't do a lot for me. The second one with the zombies in the woods, I don't think this concept is as original as it thinks it is, but the film really picks up with the third story that's set in Indonesia. So it's just like a really chaotic bloodbath full of rituals and suicides and demon goats. There's blood all over the place, people being shot. It's a riot. It's really good fun. And yeah, I think the story that comes after that, the final story, is even better. So there's like this slumber party where aliens come down and attack them, and it's great. And this is actually the story that led to the spin-off Kids vs. Aliens, I believe, although I've not personally seen it. But VHS 2, yeah, very slow to hit its full stride. But when it does, there are two really great stories waiting for you in the second half of the whole thing. So for me, like I said, it's the worst of the earlier ones. So I thought we'd have a little interval where I show you my VHS physical media. I'm going to show these in the exact order in which they were released, but I must stress this is nothing to do with the rankings. So first up, there came the original VHS. I bought this back in the days when probably DVDs was still the dominant thing. There is a Blu-ray for this now, but it's a very vanilla release. You know, it's not worth upgrading in my opinion, although, you know, if someone like Arrow came along and did a fancy new package, I might be tempted. After the first one, there came VHS 2. Then it was the turn of VHS Viral, and this is the last one that I own on DVD as opposed to Blu-ray, because there was a massive gap between VHS Viral and the next one, like 7 or 8 years maybe. And it's only just this last few months or so that I've started buying up these ones, beginning with VHS 94. So this one's a Blu-ray. They took their time releasing this, actually. I didn't think they were going to do it for some reason. I think they might have actually released VHS 99 in the UK before 94, strangely. But this is the fourth one in the series. Then we get to the fifth one, VHS 99, and VHS 85. I don't own VHS Beyond because it's not been released on physical media yet. Right, let's get back to the rankings and find out what is in fourth spot. So number 4, we have VHS Viral. Not a particularly beloved entry, but it's a bit of a personal favourite of mine. It is the shortest in the series, though. There's only 3 main stories on this. They did film a 4th one, but then they ended up leaving it out because they felt like it didn't fit enough with the other stories. But you can still access this story if you've got the Blu-ray, I believe, or you could just watch it on YouTube. I've watched it on YouTube before, though I can't remember the title of the story. But everything that has been left in this film is superb. This has got my favourite wraparound segment of the entire franchise. It's the one with the runaway ice cream van that's making people go crazy when it drives past them. And the main stories are all absolutely top-notch. I love the first one with the magician who's got this evil cloak. And the second story might be my favourite in the entire franchise. It's just pure horror. This scientist guy creates this portal and he goes through it to an alternative universe, but he's got a doppelganger who comes the other way into his world. And there's so much creativity in this story. It's absolutely brilliant. The third story's probably the weakest on the collection, but it's still really good. It's about these kids who go to Mexico to just skate around and do graffiti and things, but like these zombies come out of nowhere, and these kids have got guns, it turns out, so they have this massive shootout, and they're trying to desperately to escape back to America, but it's not easy because these zombies are just coming out of everywhere. But this film is just fantastic from beginning to end, albeit it is one of the shortest in the series at about 85 minutes. So for that reason, I've left it out of the top 3, but still a hugely underrated VHS film. Number 3, we have the original VHS. Now, it was very tight between these top 3 films, but the reason this one has only got the bronze medal today is because of its wraparound segment, which is utterly dreadful. So we follow these dickheads who were just driving around, sexually assaulting women and smashing up abandoned buildings. And then eventually they break into this dark house and just start watching the VHS tapes that we are about to watch. But honestly, if this is your first time watching a VHS movie and you're presented with this, I could imagine you possibly turning off before you get to the main stories, which is a real shame because the main stories in this film are the absolute gold of the whole thing. The first story is regarded as possibly the best in the entire franchise, even though it isn't for me personally. It's the one with the woman in the hotel room, and it turns out that she's like some kind of succubus with wings. It's really great, and this is the story that eventually would get a spin-off called Siren, albeit that wasn't as good. But my personal favourite story on this one is the second one with the couple who are driving across Arizona on like a sightseeing trip, but they're being followed by a mysterious woman. I love the characterisation in this story, and there are so many clues in this as to what's about to happen that you won't pick up on until a second watch, which is really clever. And another personal favourite on this one is the 5th story, where the kids on Halloween go up to the top of this really big house. They stumble across this cult performing some kind of ritual, and then they flee downstairs again. But the devil has been awoken by this point, and there's like arms coming through the walls, and windows are closing, and doors are shutting, and it's freaky as hell. It's a great way for this film to finish, and there are other great stories as well. Number 2, we have VHS 99. To be honest, this one doesn't have the greatest wraparound segment either. So it's essentially just a bunch of clips of toy soldiers messing around and stuff, but at least it's artistic and original, and it's certainly not as haphazard as everything going on at the beginning of the original VHS, but the main stories here are phenomenal. My personal favourite is probably Ozzy's Dungeon, which is like a send-up of 80s TV shows. You might not fully appreciate just how good this story is if you are under the age of 40 or so, but if you are of a certain age, you'll probably get a lot out of this one. And I also love the one about the band called Bitch Cat. Let's just say it's bitching, because it's a cracking way to kick off the main stories here. And there's also a story where some characters accidentally get sent to hell. They end up in this hellish landscape. There's like something out of Doom or Quake. And there's not a single weak story in this collection. There's 5 main stories here. They're all great. For me, this is absolutely one of the highlights of the franchise, VHS 99. So, top of the tree, at number 1, we have VHS 94. This was the franchise's comeback movie, because when it appeared in 2021, there hadn't been a VHS film in quite a long time, and what a way for the series to re-emerge, because I just love this film. The wraparound story is more of an arty sort of thing rather than an actual story. So we see these FBI guys, or maybe it's a SWAT team, they're breaking into this warehouse, and every time we come back to this segment, we see them investigating some new creepy room that they've stumbled across. So we're always getting interesting things to look at between the main stories, albeit there's not a lot of plot necessarily. But the actual main stories themselves in this are great. There's not a single one which isn't awesome. My personal favourite is probably the one about the mad scientist. So there's this scientist guy who's living underground, and he's putting together these half-human, half-robot hybrids, weirdly enough, and then another SWAT team turns up, and there's this whole battle that goes on, and it's just great. I absolutely love it. And there's another great story involving a woman who has to stay overnight in a funeral parlour. This one's more about the atmosphere and the scares. You get a great variety throughout VHS 94, but every single story really hits here, and for me, this is just the best of the bunch. I think there was a real sort of peak era that went on with VHS in the middle of it all, which would have been VHS 94 and 99, because they came out in back-to-back years, and for me, they are the best 2 films. But do let me know in the comments how you would rank these movies. I'd be fascinated to see your list. But for now, I'm going to call time on this ranking, although we will have a very quick reading update, because I've actually finished a novel this week. So I've just finished reading Alien 3, the novelisation, so I've now read all the novels from the original trilogy, and I thought this was great. It's It's actually better than the Aliens novel. You never would have predicted that, would you? But I think it's mainly because it's more of a character piece. It relies more on atmosphere rather than action. It just translates to a novel better. I never would have predicted coming into this that Aliens, James Cameron's Aliens, would make for the worst novel out of the original trilogy. Because all the way through that, I just wanted to put the film on. Whereas with Alien and Alien 3, I was quite happy to read the novel because it just makes for a really great book somehow. But I am going to plod on and read Alien Resurrection, but I'm going to take a little bit of a break and go back to Stephen King briefly and read his novel Firestarter. So that's what I'm going on to next. Hopefully I'll be able to do a mini review very, very soon. But as for this, yeah, it's pretty good. And I'll also point out that it is the assembly cut version that's been written about here. It's not the theatrical version. I was a little bit concerned about that, but no, you get all the stuff with Golic and all the extra bits that you get in the assembly cut with this. Right, I'll leave it there for today. Thank you for joining me, primarily for the VHS ranking, and I'll catch you all again next time. Bye-bye.